Welcome to Making Sense of the Madness. I am Jason Bermas. We've got a great show lined up for you today. We've got Don Brown, ex-U.S. Navy JAG officer and author of Kangaroo Court. We're going to be talking about the weaponization of the injustice system. You're not going to want to miss it. Buckle up and get ready to make sense of the madness. And we are back. We're with Don Brown. Now, before we get into the book and the subject matter, and really, I think the outward weaponization of the Injustice Department, because I think we've had real problems with it over the decades. This isn't just something that jumped out. It accelerated at a massive pace when I think political enemies of the system got too powerful. Obviously, Trump has his problems, but was very, very anti the same agenda we were seeing on both sides, in my opinion, for some time. You are a ex-U.S. Navy JAG officer. Now, most people, at least in my generation, know the cheesy show that was around for about a decade. But for those that don't know what your real profession was, why don't you let people know how you went on that journey and what you actually did?
Well, sure. Well, yes, as you pointed out, I was an ex-Navy JAG officer, also a special assistant United States attorney. So I've been in the federal system quite a bit. And, JAG officers are lawyers on active duty as officers within the military. And that world opened up a lot of opportunities for me, especially to write, Kangaroo Court, which you're kind enough to show on the split screen, is the 16th book I've had published. Most of my books have been military related. The last few have veered from that a bit, but I was 5 years active. My last duty station was at the Pentagon. My office was destroyed on 9/11 at the Pentagon. I know you have espoused some theories on that. All I know, if by the grace of God, if I were not out of active duty by then, I wouldn't be with you now. So, and then working with the U.S. Attorney's Office, I got to see the inside of how the federal legal system works, and I've been involved in a number of constitutional cases since then as a private attorney. Ran for Congress this past term. President Trump pardoned my client, Lieutenant Clint Lawrence, in 2019. That case got quite a bit of national attention. It was on Fox and just about every other major network you can think of. Lawrence had been a 82nd Airborne paratrooper whose platoon got into a firefight in Afghanistan. Lawrence never pulled a trigger. Obama's rules of engagement, went after him and got him convicted for it. They threatened his men that would prosecute them for murder, got him convicted. He was serving 20 years in Leavenworth. In November of 2019, just after Veterans Day, President Trump pardoned him. And so I've been involved in the fight. I was involved in several legal teams during the election steal in 2020. That's exactly what it was. So I've seen a lot of evidence on the inside. And then observing what's going on with these political prosecutions, I suppose writing Kangaroo Court was a natural progression of that. And Jason, if you already sort of alluded to, and we can get into this a little bit more, the Trump prosecutions brought attention to this travesty. It is a direct attack on the Constitution. But this has been the Democrats' modus operandi really for the last 20 to 30 years, just increasing in intensity, and we got to bring it to a stop.
So let's talk about that for a second, right? You brought up 9/11, and obviously you seem to know some of my work on 9/11. But really, no matter what you think of it, our entire foreign and domestic policy was reshaped via that, whole time period. A lot of people talk about the Patriot Act, but you've got the Patriot Act, you've got DHS, you've got massive military operations in all of the Middle East within a decade, basically, right? On top of that, you got the Military Commissions Act, you've got the National Defense Authorization Act, all these things that just continue to grow. So I talked about DHS. You go from DHS to the fact that you have all these fusion centers that surround it. When you look at not only the military operations in the Middle East, you see the rise of privatized military groups. We now have the signature reduction program, which either a lot of people aren't aware of, it's been around over a decade, or they just don't want to talk about it with me. because every time I bring it up, it's crickets. So you have this, I would call it an executive within an executive that doesn't even answer to the executive in many ways. And in this case, has opposed the executive. Now, you discussed how, this really showed awareness. For you, a guy who was in the Pentagon on 9/11, what have you seen in that transition, right?
To be clear, by the grace of God, I was not in the
Well,
Pentagon on
when I say
9/11.
you were in the Pentagon, I mean you worked
But,
there. Yeah, you were.
but I did serve in the Pentagon,
Yeah.
and but had left active duty, and my office was destroyed and everybody killed in it. So you start thinking about things. And well, my goodness gracious, if I'd been there a couple of years later, that would have been it. So
Gotcha.
it does make you think. It sure does.
So, but what I'm trying to say is you've seen kind of this metamorphosis, right? Like for instance, when we talk about DHS, we talk about what's going on with these prosecutions against Trump and his people, and then this wide open border. We had Border Patrol before DHS. It's not like they're the lords of the border, and in fact, it wasn't perfect back then. But you see the complete inversion of what it was supposed to be, and during that war on terror period. Remember, we had the color coded system. Our borders were the most, affected. If you saw something, say something, etc. Now it's just let everybody in, right? So obviously, I think even prior to like the excessive stuff against Trump, obviously the COVID stuff started waking people up, and then you said you've worked on the election. That flipped a lot of people as well. But what has your awakening been? Because I'm sure that you've seen corruption in the Justice Department prior to this as well.
I would say, Jason, that my moment of awakening is when I got involved in working with some Gold Star families on a helicopter that was shot down in Afghanistan called Extortion 17 or Extortion 17. And these guys were blown out of the sky. It was the largest loss of life in the history of the Afghan war, largest loss of life in the history of the U.S. Navy SEALs. We lost 30 Americans, including 17 members of SEAL Team 6. This was just 96 days after, Osama bin Laden was reported to have been taken out. And as I saw a press conference that was put on by the National Press Club in D.C., and some of these Gold Star family members were there, Billy and Karen Vaughn, and others. And there were several significant members of the U.S. Congress, conservative at the time, who were with them. Alan West was there. Louis Gohmert, and several prominent former military officers like General Boykin, who's become a friend of mine, others, and Ace Lyons, who were standing with him. And as I watched that press conference, I knew something had gone wrong. I wasn't sure exactly what had gone wrong. I mentioned earlier I'd been a special assistant U.S. attorney. The Navy had dispatched me to the U.S. Attorney's Office in San Diego years earlier, and I defended a case involving the F-14 that crashed down in Brown Field in South San Diego County. So I knew a little bit about aviation disasters because I handled a case. And I sent just an email to Karen Vaughn, who is the mother of Aaron Vaughn, who lost his life August 6th in 2011. Said, listen, I saw your press conference. At that time, I had several books released. They were military fiction books. I said, I'm an author. I'm a former JAG officer. I also have handled a military aviation disaster case. If I can help you in any way, let me know. She wrote back, and that led to a long-standing relationship with me and the Vaughns that is there even today. And Billy met with me. The Vaughns met with me about 3 weeks later in Atlanta in a Denny's restaurant. We had an omelet, and they were sizing me up because they don't know who they could trust. And at the end of this long meeting, he slipped this little disc over to me and said, take this. I trust you. I took the disc, and it was 1,250 pages of the investigation of the shoot down of Extortion 17, which, now, Jason, this is almost unheard of, had been strangely declassified in a period of about 6 weeks. Normally, it takes 50 years to declassify. Someone on the inside declassified these documents. I took the disc home. I read the disc. I can read militaryese, and came to the conclusion that these men had either been deliberately sacrificed by our own government, or their deaths were the result of inexcusable criminal negligence. And that was a turning point for me. From that point on, everything. There's no conspiracy theory, in my opinion. Conspiracy. I mean, something could be a conspiracy theory, but I don't blow stuff off immediately as a conspiracy theory until I start doing my homework, because those men were sacrificed, and they were sacrificed probably with CIA involvement, the deep state involvement. And this government will take American lives. They've become so corrupt, they'll take American lives for the advancement of the agenda of the deep state. And that was my turning point. And I've never really turned back since then, I would say.
So then let's talk about that, because, in comes Trump. I think that Trump is pretty imperfect, but I voted for him 3 times. When I look at 2016, a lot of people forget this because they're not, that involved or politically astute. But for me, Rand Paul was running, right? And he was the one guy up there, not his father, Ron, who, God bless him, is still around, and now
and
even better.
Maybe back in the administration, who knows? Let me close you off. Yeah.
Again, who knows, right? Exactly. Hey, it's a weird world out there. But, I saw Trump, and once Rand kind of ran out of the race by Trump, and Trump was just dominating these other guys, Jeb Bush in particular.
Yeah.
I thought to myself, look, I get it. He's an actor. He's a gangster. He's a bit of a womanizer. I mean, let's be honest. And I still say it to this day, if you think this guy, no matter what kind of business deals he was doing in New York City and building things, got to build casinos without certain organizations, come on. I mean, that's ridiculous, everybody. It's just not real. So I looked at it and I was like, and he's saying things that no one else is saying. For instance, this is a guy that really did have a close relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, but obviously knew other people that had other relationships with Jeffrey Epstein and wasn't afraid to talk about it. When he talked about it with Hannity, in that town hall, even when he talked about Saudi Arabia's involvement in 9/11 and the possibility of going to those were kind of earmark moments for people like myself that have felt politically homeless, right? He gets in. Look, more money in my paycheck first month. I remember that first thing. And I'm like, okay, all right, we're going in the right direction. There were moments where I was extremely angry, letting Mattis shoot bombs into Syria in that attack on Duma that later, again, if you look at it, OPCW documents, doesn't even look like it happened. He still talks about that, upsets me. Obviously, his actions during the COVID 1984 nightmare, not my favorite. But I also saw the climate, and I didn't love the Pompeos, the Bill Barrs. I didn't trust these people. I knew the Durham report was going nowhere.
I'm not coming back.
Well, that's that. Let's hope we're going forward with the right people. I had Rudy Giuliani on here a couple weeks ago, to my surprise, believe me. But we're talking about it, and he's agreeing with me. I mean, Barr had the Hunter Biden laptop for almost a year beforehand and did nothing with it, and then let all the propaganda go. That should let you know everything you need to know about Bill Barr. Epstein, again, the most high-profile prisoner of my time. The only one you could maybe argue globally was more high-profile, was kept in the same prison. It was El Chapo, who had been broken out of several other prisons, and they kept him alive. But somehow they couldn't keep Epstein alive. Very odd. Very, very odd.
You can see it coming from a mile down the road, too.
So when you look at these things, who does Trump actually have to put in office at this point where we can get a turnaround? What does a turnaround look like?
You're asking a very important fundamental question. I think the president has learned from some of the on-the-job experience at first. I know for a fact that a few months into his administration, he called Louis Gohmert into the Oval Office. He had a bunch of people waiting for him. He said, "Who can I trust?" I think he thought, from a businessman's perspective, if you went to this university, you worked in the State Department, you must be qualified. And I think he's learned his lesson. So I think he's going to be trying to vet his cabinet and the senior appointees. The president appointed about 1,000 people altogether outside of congressional approval. I think he's going to look for folks who have a track record of America first. We're in this battle of nationalism versus globalism. I'm a proud American nationalist because I embrace the United States Constitution as the greatest, in my opinion, the greatest written document ever, aside from the Holy Bible itself. And so I think this is going to be the litmus test for trying to determine who to bring into the administration. Now, very clearly, he's already thanked and excused Nikki Haley and Mike Pompeo. They won't be returning to the administration. I don't think you're going to have anybody that he perceives to be as a neocon. I mean, you think about Trump, and you're right. He's not perfect, but I tell you one thing: he's been on mark in most of his political instincts. If you go back and you're talking about what happened after 9/11, there was an explosion, not just of the deep state itself, with new bureaucracies as HAS and the National Defense Authorization Act, National Security Act. We have Section 2207. We have spying on Americans. You know it better than I do. But Eisenhower himself, you go back and look at your history and look at his very final address to the nation, warned against the military-industrial complex. There's been an explosion of that. And when we went into Iraq, even if you believe that, whatever you believe about this, what happened in 9/11, one thing you can say for sure is that Saddam Hussein had nothing to do with buildings coming down. And people didn't realize that. And Bush 43 used it as an opportunity to go into Iraq, to cost American lives, to spend billions of dollars. And the place is now more unstabilized, less stable than it was when Saddam was there. And but Trump caught it right on that. He was like a lone wolf all alone. And in retrospect, he was correct. And so I think he's going to look for folks that are sharing the same philosophies that he does and have a track record of sharing the same philosophies. And you got to cut the deep state. When I was running for Congress, I was proposing something which I think we need. It's called the Deep State Reduction Act. We've got nearly 3 million federal employees. And when you look at the national debt, that is a ticking time bomb. And, we got to cut the administrative state for 2 reasons. One, we've got to save the money. So I'd say, cut 50% of the employees that we have over a period of 10 years, just make an effort to cut those. And then we need to cut it because the deep state has been passing these regulations, which the Supreme Court in the past has said has the force and effect of law. Now, I'm hoping that due to some of the decisions we've seen this summer, that's going to be gutted a bit. But they make federal law. Most of the laws we have to deal with are by unelected bureaucrats, and most folks don't even realize that. I think Congress is making the law, but no, it's these regulations that can send people to prison that are made up by bureaucrats that have never been elected. They're usually leftists, communist in their philosophy, and so he's got to root that, and he's got a plan to do that, and I'm hoping he'll be able to get it executed. And maybe these guys like Bill Gates can help him out some, but there's going to be a war. Make no mistake about it. There is going to be a war in cutting the deep state because you got to take a meat cleaver to it.
I agree. We got to take a break. Kangaroo Court is the book. We're going to be back with more Making Sense of the Madness after this.
Hey, folks, it's your buddy John Rich here and co-founder of Old Glory Bank. Let me ask you a question. Why would you trust your banking with people that hate you? Well, you shouldn't. We're building a freedom economy, and now we have a pro-America bank. It's called Old Glory Bank. Check it out at oldglorybank.com and open yourself an account today.
Old Glory Bank is a full-service, FDIC-insured online bank with business and consumer banking and customers in all 50 states. It takes just 8 minutes to open an account at oldglorybank.com.
I couldn't give anything a higher endorsement.
I would be remiss had I not include Cardio Miracle on my very short list of secrets.
It's the real deal. It's a real product. It's not another supplement.
I'm operating about 6 to 8 hours, and I've noticed that being on this Cardio Miracle has made a huge difference.
Since I started taking Cardio Miracle, about 8 months into it, the benefits have been fantastic.
If I get hungry, then I just have a Cardio Miracle.
Not only is it safe, but it's necessary to take Cardio Miracle to stay well.
This let me sleep. It's showing up more energy, more get up and go. And it's all because of what this company does.
For me as a doctor, Cardio Miracle is a staple.
Cardio Miracle to me is hope in a glass.
To try Cardio Miracle for yourself and get a special fan discount, go to the host page right now and click the link for Cardio Miracle.
And we are back with Don Brown. So let's talk about some of these cases, right? The lawfare that's been outwardly waged. I mean, the New York case, we're still waiting on whether or not he's actually going to have to do jail time for these 34 convictions that, on appeal, I don't know how they stand up. On appeal in New York, more times than not, the right thing is done, but not always at this point. I mean, it is a captured state. I think that's another issue. I still don't think, even after the resounding victory by Trump, we have free and fair elections. I think if we did, it would have been a 50-state run, in my opinion. I think we need to get the machines out. I think the mail-in ballots got to get out. I think we got to have voter ID. I think then we see what's really going on. And look, there will never be a perfect system because we know that people cheat, and especially in elections. But that's a good start. The system that we have right now is a mess. What do you think the most egregious cases have been? Because this New York case is pretty bad, but we also had 2 other cases in New York where they essentially went after the man's business. And look, again, I kind of playfully joke about the mafia thing. He's kept his books clean for a very long time, or he wouldn't be in business. I get it that he's declared bankruptcy several times as well, but those are sub companies. And at the same time, again, he's never done jail time. And if they had anything good on him, they would have went after him they tried to go after him the first time when he was running in 2016. They had nothing. And if the best they had was a relationship with a porn star and maybe a payoff, I don't care. I don't care. But then, I mean, if you want to talk about like the quote unquote sex scandals, they bring in a verifiably insane actress that was never relevant, who talks about a story from decades ago that nobody can verify. And there was certainly never any criminal charges or intent ever, never even a talk of this thing. And he loses that case for almost $100 million. I mean, those might be egregious, but then all of New York is insane. But that's, again, scratching the surface when you look at Mike Flynn, Roger Stone, Steve Bannon, go down the line, Manafort, right? Giuliani. I may not love these people politically, but I see what they got them for, and it's ridiculous. I mean, it's not ridiculous. It's dangerous.
Jason, you ask which is worse. It's who's worse, the Nazis or the commies? Take your pick. But I would start by saying that every so-called criminal case the president has faced, from Florida to Georgia with Fannie Willis to D.C., with Jack Smith, to New York with Letitia James and Alvin Bragg, every one are 1,000% frivolous, okay? And every one are primarily an attack against the United States Constitution. You mentioned the one that Judge Merchan should never put on a black robe and appear before in any courtroom again. That idiot gave instructions to that jury 3 times saying that you do not have to have a unanimous verdict to convict. And that whole thing, they try to get him on the Business Records Act, which is a misdemeanor in New York, 2 years it runs. So they try to put a felony on top of it, a misdemeanor in order to commit a tax crime or an election crime. And then they intentionally stretch the statute of limitations out with the help of the former Governor Cuomo, who stretched it for another couple of years because of COVID, which he does not have a legal right to do. But this summer, there were 3 significant cases from the Supreme Court, and one which I think is going to certainly tank this case in New York is called Erlanger versus United States. It's not directly a Trump case or a January 6th case, but in that case, the U.S. Supreme Court said you must constitutionally have a unanimous verdict on all elements in order to convict for a criminal crime. We all knew that anyway. But what's happened here is now the president is facing sentencing based upon constitutionally flawed jury instructions from Judge Merchan. It is absolutely 1,000% reversible under the Erlanger decision. So you pointed out we don't know exactly what might happen in these cases with the New York appeals courts, but the president's attorneys could ask for an emergency hearing with the United States Supreme Court and should get it. And that case should be reversed based on those instructions altogether. The other problem there, and people have argued this, is that because the U.S. v. Trump, you can't use actions during, the president's term to prosecute him politically. They used statements that the president made during his term as part of that prosecution, which also makes it reversible. So I'm not sure what this guy Merchan, he's crazy. certainly he wouldn't try to impose some sort of active sentence. You wouldn't think. The Democrats have taken a big beating, but you never know. You just never know. So I saw today that he is now delaying his sentencing for another 7 days, and only time will tell. But if I'm representing the president and things go south, I will petition immediately to SCOTUS to try to get some relief, because there's a huge constitutional crisis. And even John Roberts, who I don't trust half the time, has got to have enough sense to know that SCOTUS should pick that one up and reverse it and dispense of it. So we'll see what happens.
So let's talk a little bit about the Supreme Court, because color me skeptical. I think they've made some terrible moves. I know that people on the conservative end are happy about the states' rights with abortions. I certainly was never making that my hill to die on. However, when you started getting in the realm of 6 months, 9 months, the talk of live babies, okay, now I totally get why people are involved on that issue. But two of the issues I'm really concerned about is, number one, in 2020, the Supreme Court refused to look at the evidence of election fraud. I mean, they said there was no standing. That's insane. Let's take it a step further. You had Missouri versus Biden, the state Supreme Court, and this just really shows my ignorance. I think I'm a smart guy. But when I saw that the state Supreme Court had seen that case and they had made the right decision, that this was clear collusion with the government and big tech and anti-First Amendment, I thought that the Supreme Court, when they ruled in this unheard of injunction that we're going to whoa Nelly on that case, we're going to wait until we're going to look at it. They didn't tell us they were going to look at it this next round. They did, but they didn't. They again ruled, I think, what was it, 4-3. There was no standing in that case. That's insane also. So now you had a state Supreme Court that looked at the evidence, clearly saw the collusion. And now our Supreme Court, in one of the most important cases ever, that just scratches the surface of this techno-fascism within this executive state, this plausible deniability circle, doesn't even look at it. That's no bueno, no?
You raised two very important points with two very, very important cases, and I'll go in reverse chronological order here. On Missouri v. Biden, I believe the Federal Court of Appeals upheld Missouri in its attack on the administration's using social media basically to enforce propaganda. And SCOTUS could have ignored that altogether, and that would have ended it for the time being. And I give them a B- at best for their performance over the summer, because that is the most disappointing case that came down the pipe. But I want you to know that people say, well, we're a communist, we're whatever we are. Benito Mussolini himself, who was the father of fascism in the modern era, said this. He said that corporatism is the cornerstone of fascism. Corporatism is the cornerstone of fascism. In other words, a fascist regime is not going to wipe out private companies as a communist would. They're going to use it, as their tool to enforce the lack of constitutionality. And so when you have the Biden administration, putting pressure on social media, and I've been deplatformed and warned about community standards over and over and over again. If you're posting about the vaccine, if you're posting about anything concerning election fraud, you get warned, you get removed. That is an example of how this government has become fascist. And it isn't just really in the area of election fraud. We've seen it. We've seen it also. They come into these big woke corporations and they force their own, political agendas on corporations. No, listen, here's the thing about it. You want to celebrate gay rights for a month in June on your personal dime, that's fine. But the government should not be subsidizing one political group over another for a period of a month. But the government goes through Bank of America and, pick, General Motors, you pick your company, and they force their mandates. That's why, when they, they have assaulted small business. They want only big business. They want large corporations that they can put their thumb on. So we've been looking at a fascist environment because of this. And shame on the Supreme Court for not at least deferring on that case, because we've made some progress. As soon as that case came down the pipe, Facebook goes back to censoring anti-Democrat posts again. Now, with regard to the court punting in 2020, you're talking about the case of Pennsylvania versus Texas. I know that case well because I was on the initial legal team that led to its filing by Attorney General Ken Paxton. There are a number of conservative attorneys who came together, and I was on 3 different teams. And the former Chief Justice of the North Carolina Supreme Court, Mark Martin, this brilliant jurist, came up with the idea you can bring a state versus state action directly in the Supreme Court without having to go through the district court, the appeals court. The case was put together, the complaint was put together, and it took us forever to even find an attorney general, a Republican attorney general, who had the guts to file the case. I was personally responsible for 2 of the 18 or so Republican attorney generals. I won't give their names, but I had multiple conversations with one Republican attorney general who said, well, Don, I understand what you're saying, but we wanted him to be the lead plaintiff on the case. He said, but I'm the lead plaintiff, it'll look like I'm overturning the election. I said, Mr. Attorney General, I've lost my cool with him. I said, they're going to overturn your election in the future if you don't get a hold of this now. Most Republican AGs were afraid to take that case on. And God bless Ken Paxton, he took it on. And let me tell you something. When Texas filed that case, Texas was not the best plaintiff to file the case. You say, well, why is that? Because the Republican governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, had unilaterally moved voting deadlines around without authority. Now, I like Greg Abbott just fine, but he weakened Texas's case. And when that case got to SCOTUS, you had only 2 justices, Alito and Thomas, that were even willing to look at it. Everybody else, including the 3 Trump appointees and Roberts, who got to them, apparently punted on it. If you compare that to Bush versus Gore 20 years before in 2000, when you had differing standards in Palm Beach with the hanging chads, the court finally, SCOTUS, the Supreme Court, took that case up and stopped all the counting and found that differing standards in differing counties and the way you count votes is a violation of the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution under the 14th Amendment. Well, let me tell you something, my man. What Pennsylvania was doing made what was happening in Florida look like a trip to Romper Room. I mean, the Philadelphia machine is one of the most corrupt Democrat machines anywhere in the country. We know situations, for example, even when 43 was running against Kerry, there were situations where we had more votes cast in precincts in Philadelphia than there were registered voters. And of course, 43 didn't touch it. He won the election anyway. But it is a corrupt machine. And so you're right. All we had was one punt after another punt after another punt. And when these people go around, even some Republicans, no court ever found any evidence. Let me tell you something, Jason. No court ever looked at any substantive evidence at all, okay, of anything that was going on. They punted it on standing or other grounds. They were afraid to do it. And why do I think they were afraid to do it? I think they were afraid because of the George Floyd riots that just happened back in the summer. They didn't want a rioting. They didn't want the Supreme Court burned down. I think they were chicken. But that was the most massive political steal in American history. I mean, give me a break. Listen, think about this. Joe Biden won approximately half the number of counties in 2020 as his daddy, Barack Obama, won in 2012. Obama won 800 some counties in 2012 in a victory. Biden wins 400 some counties. Obama has 75 million votes. Biden has 81 million votes. And you tell me how in the world Biden winning half the number of counties has all these millions of votes more than Obama. And nobody, if you ask a question about that, they want to browbeat you with rhetoric. You're an election denier, Hey, we got a right to ask questions, and never in history have 6 states simultaneously shut down at 10 o'clock like we saw. And I took affidavits personally from Republican poll workers in the TGF Center in Detroit. And I can tell you, they testified to hundreds of ballots coming in the middle of the night, single shot, Biden, nobody else being voted for. We took affidavits of witnesses who saw military ballots coming in of guys born in 1900, Democrats ran them through. And the same thing happened in Fulton and DeKalb counties. I could go on a rampage on that. I won't do it. I know they weren't talking about that. But the Supreme Court in 2020 abdicated this responsibility to the United States by letting this thing ride without anybody challenging or at least looking at something substantively. They were afraid to do it, in my opinion. That's my opinion.
Well, I think there was a number of reasons. I think it wasn't just fear of riots, it was fear of their career. Obviously, they went after anybody that dared not anoint Joe Biden the most popular president ever voted in history. Even after this election, folks, it's 81 million style. I mean, they love this guy, dementia and all. We got to take a break. When we come back, I want to talk about Vivek Ramaswamy, and I'm hoping that he is going to be in this administration, because when we talked about the administrative state, he talked about cutting in half on day one via Social Security number. I love that. I'm going to get Don's take on it and much more. The book is Kangaroo Court, more making sense of the madness after this.
My name is General Mike Flynn, and I want everyone to know that I stand fully behind Beverly Hills Precious Metals and its owner, Andrew Sorcini. We are facing one of the greatest periods of financial uncertainty in both American and world history, and so now is the time to organize your finances. With the advent of the BRICS pay system, we need to now seriously consider how we can take better care of ourselves and our families and start some serious decision making when it comes to our wealth. You can also ask about their newest 2-ounce coin of yours truly. It's an absolutely great gift, and I am deeply honored to be part of history, as well as helping people protect their finances, their wealth, and their investments. So visit gold.generalflynn.com. Tell them the General sent you. Thank you so very much. God bless you, and God bless America.
The Donor Deck represents a groundbreaking independent crowdfunding initiative driven by patriots like you to bring back our esteemed President Donald J. Trump to office. With unwavering passion, we pledge all profits from the sale to MAGA Inc. and Fight Like a Flynn PAC. The exquisitely detailed challenge coin is a timeless collectible to be passed down to generations. It symbolizes your continuous dedication to assisting President Trump in his quest to rejuvenate America to its former greatness. Get your Donor Deck now. Go to the Patriot.tv store and click on Donor Deck. Enjoy the magnificent artwork and scripture on each playing card, knowing our appreciation for your continuous dedication to assisting President Trump in his quest to rejuvenate America to its former greatness. You'll get this keepsake collectible challenge coin acknowledging your support for Donald Trump's run back to the White House, and the Donor Deck of 52 exquisite playing cards, plus a beautiful display case to show your challenge coin. Go to the Patriot.tv store and get your Donor Deck now.
And we are back. Now, look, I think all these people are pretty imperfect. I did like the Ramaswamy campaign. Again, I don't know whether it was Trump 2.0. I thought he was getting a lot more right than Trump. Thought when he hit kind of the Middle Eastern, Israeli rail, that's kind of where you got to see more establishment politics. Comes from the biopharma arena. You always got to be careful there as well. But at the same time, he said, look, we have an administrative state, and one of the ways to rein it in is that you have to cut it up. And he said randomly cutting it in half, which I think is a great idea, on day one via Social Security number, mass firings is a great start. Now, I had never even pondered this, and believe me, I've pondered a lot. How do you restore a constitutional republic? How do you get an accountability in a country that really on an executive level hasn't seen accountability within the military / intel community since Iran-Contra. And a lot of that was, slaps on the wrist, people getting their sentences commuted after the fact, pardons, Oliver North being the face of it, not going to jail, getting book deals and radio shows and television appearances instead, not really the way to, I'd say, hinder that behavior. But cutting it in half and then looking at all these bureaucracies and maybe actually getting rid of them. I mean, I know the Department of Education is one of those things they talk about. That's a good start. It's certainly, you're going to get a lot of resistance, but guess what? As soon as that's done, it's not like our country's going to stop. Everybody's going to wake up the next morning. You're going to send your kids to school. You're going to go to work unless you're one of those bureaucrats that was probably completely useless anyway. And we're going to get by. And I think that we can, you bring somebody like Ron Paul in, he's going to want to do something like that, don't you think? And is that the way to start taking on this leviathan of what is referred to as the quote-unquote deep state?
You know, Jason, one of the things that's frustrated me so much about Republican candidates at the congressional level especially, people are on, I'm the most conservative, I'm the most backward, but there has been a failure to articulate a battle plan. And to save our constitutional republic, there are a number of things we got to do. But one of the things we have to do is we have to go to war against the deep state. Now, I'm not NSA. I'm talking about a philosophical war. We've got to cut the deep state. We have to gut the deep state. Now, there are several practical challenges with that. One thing that has to happen is that the civil service reform acts that have been passed, it's almost as hard to fire a federal bureaucrat as it is a college professor. These civil service reform acts have got to be repealed or changed so that more and more people can be dismissed and fired for cause, okay? And so that's got to happen. Now, it looks like we're going to have a Republican Congress. The question is, are they going to put their money where their mouth is, or are they going to squander it like they did the first 2 years of the Trump administration? We had a chance to take out Obamacare, and McCain does this. We have got to go to war against the deep state. We've got to cut it. We have to take a butcher's knife and just chop and chop and chop and chop. You look at what Elon did with Twitter, where he cuts the number of employees down by about 70%. That's what needs to happen within the federal government. And so that's where it needs to start. Now you can freeze hiring and just let them, for one thing, you let them just retire and leave, and that will help some. But we've got to go after agencies. And you mentioned the Department of Education. That's been out there. And we haven't had Republican candidates say, I'm running and I'm going to propose bills to eliminate DOE, Department of Education, I should say. There's also the Department of Energy. But we haven't seen that type of vision. And if you think about the Department of Education, it was signed into law during the last year of the Jimmy Carter administration. It's become this leviathan of a bureaucracy in D.C., which has, if you look at what's happened to American test scores since the 1980 when it came into being, we have floundered and dropped in our national standards against especially the Pacific Rim countries. So what good has it done? All it has done is serve as an opportunity for the federal government to impose standards, i.e. to impose philosophical brainwashing on American school kids. It should go immediately. And of course, you bring a bill to pass it, to reduce it, you're going to have a war with a deep state. Ronald Reagan once said, famously, years and years ago, when they were talking about rioting at the University of California, he said, well, if it takes a bloodbath, let's get it over with. Now, what I'm talking about, a philosophical bloodbath for the NSC and FBI and you people out there. But we've got to go to war against this deep state and cut it, because it is the single most threatening enemy of the United States Constitution that there is. And the presidency has to be restored to what it was meant to be constitutionally. And the Congress of the United States is set out in Article 1 for a reason. The executive is set in Article 2 for a reason. This imperial presidency thing has got to come. And when I say imperial presidency, I mean the administrative deep state under the executive branch. It's got to be cut and eliminated. So I think with Vivek, he brings a lot of energy, a lot of vision. And I'm hoping these guys can get in there, and you can eliminate certain bureaucrats already, but you can certainly reorganize in a way to make it less attractive. You move government, you move agencies out. We've got to have bills on the table to eliminate agencies. We need a review of unnecessary agencies. In my opinion, about 75% are unnecessary. I think a federal agency should be directly tracked to the constitutional vision. There's a Navy and an Army, so yeah, you can have a Department of Defense. There is a post office. There's some interstate commerce, but everything else should go back to the states, and that needs to be the vision. We've got to have legislative and executive vision in attacking these agencies and taking them out. And now's the time to start.
Now, one of the other court cases that really hasn't even really been discussed in the mainstream media and not enough in the alternative media is the Assange case, where, yes, the guy's out, and that's great. Wasn't brought up in the debates, wasn't brought up in the election cycle at all. It's one of the things the Democrats could have pointed to and said, hey, we got to deal with Assange. But at the same time, it sets this awful precedent where now the Espionage Act can be used against journalists. This guy wasn't an American citizen, can't commit espionage against the United States, especially not from within. Published real documents that were 100% verifiable, and in one way or another was imprisoned against his will, sometimes in the harshest of conditions in Belmarsh, for well over a decade, okay? With also internal intel plots exposed of our own central intelligence agencies and, private organizations, which I've alluded to before, like I forget what the Israeli company under Adelson was that they worked with, but that was out there as well, these contractors. Not just the United States. British intelligence was doing the same thing when he was in the embassy. What precedent does that set? That's not a good thing. And no one's talking about it whatsoever. And look, this administration, day one, I think should rectify that in some way. Should they not? Because I think it's something dangerous that whether Trump realizes it or not could be used against him. They already really did try to use it against him in a way with that classified documents case in Florida, right? Using the Espionage Act there. So what are your thoughts?
Well, the Espionage Act is unconstitutional in my opinion. And I'll talk about the Florida case real quick and then pivot to Assange. In Florida, they were trying to attack Trump to keep him off the ballot at multiple levels and multiple jurisdictions. And so apparently had some documents at Mar-a-Lago. And this guy, Jack Smith, goes in. Jack Smith had been reversed by the U.S. Supreme Court unanimously when he went after the governor of Virginia, Bob McDonnell, in 2014. He already had a track record. But they go in and they try to attack the president on the Espionage Act. Well, they let Hillary clearly have, quote unquote, classified documents on her laptop, but no reasonable prosecutor, whatever prosecutors Comey said. Joe Biden clearly had classified documents, both at his beach home there in Rehoboth and also his office at University of Pennsylvania. But they weren't going to prosecute him because they said he wasn't competent. But listen, a former president, there's this thing called the Presidential Records Act. And I've read it. I've written articles on it. The Presidential Records Act specifically allows, and it uses this phrase, former presidents access to his or her, if there's ever one, presidential records. And those records can be anywhere from non-classified. In the military, we had three classifications I dealt with. We had confidential, we had secret and top secret, or even above that. There are no time, place, or manner restrictions under the Presidential Records Act for former president to have access to records, and there are no restrictions on classification. He's given access to all his records. And this fool, Jack Smith, never, ever presented that to the grand jury as a defense. And before Judge Cannon ultimately dismissed that case based on a violation of the Appointments Clause of the Constitution, Article 2, Section 2, she was considering that very point and allowing instructions to be given to the jury, or at least to consider the defense under the Presidential Records Act. So that case was a farce from the beginning. Now, with regard to Julian Assange, yes, they tried to go after President Trump under the National Security Act. This act to me is unconstitutional, and the problem is it gives governmental agencies a green light to basically throw the Fourth Amendment in the trash can, which prohibits any type of search without a search warrant, which is undergirded by probable cause that some sort of crime has been committed. And so, as you pointed out, American journalists such as yourself could come under, scrutiny, whereby the secret FISA court or somebody else is monitoring your conversations. And the funny thing about it is that that this act was about to be reversed in this past Congress until the current speaker, Mike Johnson, comes in and meets with certain deep state representatives in a closed session in a skiff and comes out and reverses it. My friend Congressman Dan Bishop, who unfortunately is leaving the Congress, told me he'd gotten into a debate against the speaker in a Republican caucus, arguing that, hey, this act, it violates the Fourth Amendment. And Mike Johnson said, well, what about Mike Johnson had changed his mind. So what about if there's a bomb, coming in? And to which Congressman Dan Bishop, who's a sharp lawyer and a constitutional lawyer, said, well, Mr. Speaker, we already have exigent circumstances exceptions to that sort of thing, but you're leaving in place federal law that allows the Fourth Amendment to be basically thrown in the trash can. What's their problem with Assange? What's he done? Here's what he's done. He's embarrassed them. And it goes back to the original premise. You've got to cut the deep state, and you've got to cut it at the knees, because Assange is not a U.S. citizen. If he committed, an act of war against the United States or something like that, that would be different. But what did he do? He exposed information, which their own systems allowed him to do that, and that information has now been reprinted in the United States. So they are going after him only because he embarrassed them. What they ought to do is man up and take care of the internal problems that have been exposed to return us back to constitutional protection.
You would hope that, but doesn't seem to be the direction we were heading in. We'll see what happens. I want to talk more and what we are going to see in the next couple months, because we still got to get Trump inaugurated. It's great we got the transition team. It's great we got announcements. But he hasn't sworn on that Bible just yet. Final segment of Making Sense of the Madness after this.
Hi, fellow patriots. How are you today? No, really, how are you? If you're looking for a way to energize, depuff, revitalize your skin, and maybe soothe some sore muscles, look no further than the Patriot TV store and the Nu Skin Renew Spa IO system. This is not your basic body massaging system. Nuh-uh. This has adaptive microcurrent technology that goes through these wonderful nodes on the bottom to really get in there. When you use it, you feel it just gently tickling in there and massaging everything. It's marvelous. And not only do you get the device, you also get a free tube of the special conductive gel to go with it. So there you are. You can depuff, you can revitalize, energize, and not only that, contour, firm, and tone. And we all want that. So go to the Patriot TV store now and get yours today from Nu Skin, the Renew Spa IO system. Attention business owners, are you ready to advertise to millions of loyal patriots ready to buy your products or services? Here is your golden chance to advertise with Jason Bermas and connect with his massive audience on Patriot TV and his incredibly loyal social media followers. As an advertiser on Making Sense of the Madness, you also reach his followers on the top social media sites. As Jason dives into complex current events and conspiracies, offering investigative analysis and thought-provoking discussions to uncover the deeper truths behind the headlines. When you advertise with Jason on Making Sense of the Madness, you're aligning your brand with integrity, loyalty, and a dedication to truth. Jason's audience is passionate, conservative, and committed to the values your business stands for. When given the choice, Jason's followers will buy your products or services over other woke companies. Don't miss this opportunity to elevate your brand with the power of Patriot TV. Reach out to us today at advertise@patriot.tv.
And we are back. We've only got a few minutes left in the show. But one of my great concerns, obviously, is we've had 2 real assassination attempts against this guy. One of which, he could have gotten his head blown off literally on live television. I think we live in a very different world if that happens. If you rewind 3 months ago when that occurs, I don't think he's out of the water yet. I think that at this point, his family, people close to him, are also probably targets. If we do have another attempt and it is successful, or somebody within the administration or family gets assassinated, where does that put us with this administration and what the likelihood of, positivity is after this? Because we've already said there's a ton of obstacles. One of the things that I'm a big advocate for is he says he's finally going to do the JFK thing. He promised that before, he didn't come through. But he also talked about 9/11. When I had Giuliani on, Giuliani's like, declassify it all. I'm like, all right, Rudy, I'm with you. I would love to see mass declassification within the first week and just put it into play, no matter what the administrative state. I think that's another step that you need to take to kind of peel the Band-Aids off these wounds and expose it to the public. What are your thoughts?
Well, on the declassification promises and points, I'm with you 1,000%. You look at the JFK assassination. There's nobody alive that could even be impugned or prosecuted to this point. But why has it not been fully declassified? Clearly, because there's an embarrassment to the deep state of the United States government. It goes back to the point about Assange earlier. He's embarrassing. 9/11 declassified a whole darn thing. I want to know why WTC-7 did not fall, or why it fell. Excuse me. Most people, you ask me about 9/11, how many towers went down? They'll say 2. We had 3 go down, and no plane certainly hit the third one. The American public is entitled to know. What I'm hoping, Jason, I think what we will see, and I agree. I'm concerned. We've had 2 assassination attempts, both by reckless negligence from the FBI. Remember what I said in an earlier segment about what happened with these guys in Extortion 17? I'm not convinced that leaving that roof open in Pennsylvania was by accident. We got to pray for the president's safety. Something were to happen, we've been uncharted territory. But if he is sworn in, I think you're going to see massive deregulation. You said in an earlier segment that your income improved. That's going to help the economy immediately. That the president can do. Then there'll be a legislative agenda, and that legislative agenda has to be aimed at decapitating the deep state. It's got to happen. There needs to be bold legislation going after the Department of Education. Trump mentioned, even I think maybe it was in the Rogan podcast or somewhere, he wouldn't be opposed to repealing the 16th Amendment. Well, it's interesting. He was talking about William McKinley in the Rogan broadcast and McKinley's use of tariffs. I never thought about this, but in that period of time when we had zero income tax from the 1880s to the early 1920s, that's when the America had the Industrial Revolution that gave us the foundation of the military might to win 2 world wars. And so I think we've got to go after the income tax. Take the IRS up. Any agency that is doing more harm than good should be eliminated, and that should be the blueprint moving forward. And when you have a majority in Congress, there is no excuse for it not happening. It needs to happen now.
Don, we have run out of time. The book is Kangaroo Court: How Dirty Prosecutors and Sleazy Lawyers Destroy Political Opponents, Attack Free Speech, and Subvert the Constitution. I want to thank you for joining us. And I want to thank you guys for watching this show 5 days a week here on Patriot.tv, where the truth lives. Remember, this guide is not about left or right. It is always about right and wrong. I love you guys, and we'll see you on the flip side.